Hello, Ron. I'm sure, like myself, many of you out there are concerned with the war in the Ukraine, and there's been a number of YouTube channels now that have posted videos on their feelings. In particular, Gavin Booth put up a very heartfelt and impassioned video a few days ago, and it's prompted some people to respond, but not that many, which surprises me, I have to say. So I wanted to do a video myself, and I'm going to start by showing you a page of my channel's analytics, which basically shows, it's a chart showing all the views that I've ever obtained from viewers in Russia. Now the reason, I mean, it's not very many, hardly any at all. There's one day, and I've got no idea why, what is it, June the 28th 2018 should have been a particularly popular day for my channel in Russia, but there's one day where there are about 92 views, but over the course of several years I've obtained about 400, something like that, views in Russia. The reason I remark on that is that one of the things, we all sort of feel pretty helpless in what we can do, and a common thing people do to display sympathy is to wear ribbons on their coat lapels, that kind of thing. I thought, and I would urge you to do this if you have a YouTube channel, or even if you don't, but you post remarks and comments on other people's videos, change your logo to the Ukrainian flag, because that will, it's not going to be seen by many, but it will be seen by people in Russia, as well as kind of expressing a shared sympathy for the Ukrainian people in the West. So I would urge you to do that anyway, and that's the reason I'm showing you these statistics, because if you are able to post on YouTube, then that is going to be seen by some people in Russia, most likely by people who are opposed to the war anyway, people who use social media and smartphones and so on in Russia, have access to footage and press reports and things, which gives them a different perspective on the on Putin's line, but unfortunately most people in Russia view television, get all their facts and opinions from that. So but it's one way of kind of communicating across that divide now, and one way of doing something. I mean, obviously the most important thing is to donate to the humanitarian effort that's going on, but this is just something else that might help. So I'm gonna talk in length, and probably bore most people to tears. So I'm going to kind of make a video on the subject of Complexity theory, which is something I've attempted to do before, but it does have a bearing on, well, it has bearing on everything. Complexity theory encompasses just about every aspect of existence, but it does have a bearing on the current events in the world. And I thought I would attempt, I've tried it in the past and failed miserably, but I thought I would attempt to give a little talk on complexity theory, which is an absolutely favourite subject of mine, and weave it into my opinions on the Ukraine war and on YouTube in general, and etc. etc. Anyway, so here we go. So this is the book that started it all for me. How Nature Works by Pearl Bach. And the beauty of this book is that complexity theory is very difficult to explain or get into. And this book is a wonderful kind of simplistic but not simple explanation. And when I read this book, it was like a light bulb moment for me. It was just like the penny dropped, and I understood so much that had been kind of puzzling me about why things happened in the world the way they do. And I'm going to try and explain complexity theory to you as best as I can, while saying that it's almost impossible. The reason it is almost impossible is that we talk and think in a very linear way. So you make a point and you expand on that point, and you explain one thing and understand. And once a person has understood one lesson, they then go on to a second lesson which builds on the first. So it progresses. Your learning and your understanding always progresses in a linear way. The trouble with trying to explain complexity is that you have to understand things simultaneously, as it were. So it's a very kind of explosive kind of understanding that you need to incorporate into your brain. And equally, you can only talk about one thing at once. So it's impossible for anyone, lecturing on the subject or trying to write in a book to give you an overall kind of understanding at once. So already I can feel myself struggling to explain this. But anyway, that's the main difficulty that you have. Now, there are basically a number of aspects of complexity theory that I can state to you without trying to explain why that is. So complexity basically deals with systems. And by the way, one of the things that I was hoping to do to make this video a lot more entertaining and visually interesting for you was that I recently got my old laptop working again, and it struck me that I could load this particular book. Comes with some software that you can put on your computer, and you can download programs and so on from that, which you can run. And then I could have been running those and displaying those to you. and it might even have helped in my exploration. But unfortunately, I've been struggling for hours now to get the laptop to work again. I haven't used it for a week or two, and in that interval it seems to have rebelled again, and so I want to make this video, so I'm going to have to forego the chance of showing you that particular program running. But anyway, I'll show you pages from this book that might sort of might help a little bit. And the first and most important one is a very plain diagram of a sand pile, because Purbach uses a sand pile as a kind of an analogy for a complex organisation. Now, what you have to imagine is that this sand pile is developed by someone trickling grains of sand until a pile develops from the sand that is falling from that person's hand. The sand pile has a number of characteristics. One is that it's composed of many individual particles of sand. Each particle of sand excuse me, communicates, not intelligently, but it communicates to the other grains of sand in the pile through basic laws that it is obliged to obey. So the laws of gravity, the laws of viscosity, because depending on the humidity at a particular time, the grain, each individual grain of sand will have a different viscosity from one moment to the next. The size of the grains matters, so the physics of the volume of each individual grain of sand will contribute to the overall shape and gradient of the sand pile. So there is communication, not active communication, but sort of passive communication throughout the sand pile. That has a bearing on, so every complex system is almost by definition a system that kind of communicates within itself. So the internet could be defined as a complex system in its own right. It has threads running through it in all kinds of ways, and over the entire globe. So you can think of the internet as a complex system. Now, what happens is that this sand pile, go back to the sand pile, will develop to a point where any additional increase in the number of grains of sand that are dropped onto it will result in some parts of the sand pile breaking off and falling down and creating an avalanche. So that might be just one or two grains of sand just trickling down the side. You might end up with a single grain of sand falling onto the top of the pile and causing half the side of the pile to fall down on, fall further down, slip down. So there are two aspects there. One is that a tiny input into the system, such as one additional grain of sand, can result in a massive change in the sand pile's shape and configuration. It's impossible to say, though, to predict with any sand, with any individual grain of sand, whether that will take place or not. It might be that that one individual grain of sand just causes a couple to trickle down. It can't be predicted. So the other side of that is that there are far more tiny avalanches of sand than there are massive avalanches of sand, and they are mathematically proportionate to one another. Now that is actually, when you think about it, a fascinating statement. Complexity theory is often given the misnomer of chaos theory. In chaos, there would be no proportionality. There wouldn't be any obedience to mathematical laws or to physical laws or even to laws that have been created by the brain or something like that, but by society, so societal laws, I suppose. But in complexity, there is an obedience to laws, and one of them is this mathematical ratio. So, for instance, for every massive avalanche, there is going to be 10 times as many avalanches that are less severe, and 100 times avalanches that are barely noticeable, and 1,000 times more avalanches that are smaller than that. And you can chart this if people do this. I can't remember where the university was. It's somewhere in Scandinavia. There was a study that went on for years in this university somewhere in Scandinavia, where they basically filmed grains of sand, not grains of sand, grains of rice, being piled on top of one another, and then counting the number of grains of rice that fell as a result of each additional grain of sand being placed on top of the pile. And then you can show, but by using a graph and using a logarithmic scale, you can show that there's a direct proportionality between all these different scales of avalanche, and you get a linear line on the graph, proving, that there's a mathematical law going on there, even though it's difficult to define. There is very obviously a line going on. Now, the reason this book is called How Nature Works is that, to give you another example of that line, if you can envisage it in action, the Richter scale of earthquakes is actually a logarithmic scale. And if you took a particular period of time, and a particular area of the world, or you could take the entire globe, you can count the number of earthquakes that have occurred at particular Richter scales that took place in that area and over that time scale, and you'll find that they obey exactly the same law, that for every 1,000 earthquakes at Richter scale 4, you'll have 100 at Richter scale 5, and 10 at 6, and 1 at 7. So again, it isn't chaotic. We don't live in chaos. We live in a very complex world, and earthquakes are demonstrating that there is a communication, albeit not an active communication, but a passive link between all these earthquakes that are happening. Now that brings me on to another aspect of all this, that many people, their brains kind of tell them that there has to be, when they see this pattern, that there has to be some kind of creation, some kind of creator that is, performing this kind of phenomenon, is creating this kind of phenomenon. So, in primitive times, earthquakes would have been seen as the judgment of the gods, so on, and the gods expressing their displeasure, just as severe lightning storms would have been, and so on. And it is very easy to a lot of religious people, you will find, will explain to themselves, that there is a God that is basically causing all this kind of thing to happen. That becomes problematic. So let's get on to the Ukraine in a way. That becomes problematic when bad things happen in the world, because if you believe in a God, and I don't, in a way, the complexity theory is kind of my secular religion, if there is such that's a contradiction in terms, but complexity theory is my kind of philosophy in a way. But if you do believe in a more proactive kind of deity, overlooking the world, then you have to find a way of explaining why bad things happen as well as good. And that seems to me to be where a few of the not very many videos that have been put out on as a response to Gavin are coming from. Particularly Terry at Grandad's Art Space. He believes in another coming of Christ and all this kind of thing. And Karen at Michelangelo, she said that good will eventually prevail over evil. From my personal point of view, neither of those things, apply. To me, I can see the working of complexity theory in everything about me, and I know this can go. The Ukraine war can go one of two ways, really. It will end satisfactorily, or it won't, and there is not really very much that we can do about it at first glance. Okay, so this is where I'm now going to start to get a little bit more of consolatory, as it were, and try and reassure people who feel kind of helpless in all this. Now, you are a part of very many complex systems, one of them being that you are either viewing passively, or you're commenting actively, or contributing actively with your videos to YouTube. In doing so, you are behaving in a way that is partly stems from your own morality, your own political opinions, your own religious experiences and opinions, your own, sort of character and your own moral code. There are a lot of other laws, though, that you are almost unaware of, that you are obeying, and you may not even be aware, that they are operating on you. Now, a few years ago now, I did try and put up a few videos. I think I've taken most of them down, mainly because they were like this. They were really badly articulated and not particularly interesting to watch, and they didn't get many views, and I'm pretty sure they put a lot of people off watching my channel. And it interests me in a way that Gavin Booth, I'm sure, was one of those people, because I put up a video trying to explain how people's efforts to chase subscribers and to boost their viewing ratings and to get as many likes as they could and avoid dislikes, and particularly to increase their revenue through monetization and patron schemes, all that kind of thing, affected the complete and overall nature of YouTube as a whole. And I know from the moment I put that video up, Gavin Booth stopped commenting on my channel, and he probably unsubscribed, I don't know, and he never replied to any comments that I put on his channel after that event. So I haven't, although I watched his video, on his feelings on Ukraine and was very moved by it, I haven't commented on it myself on his channel, partly because I believe he probably wouldn't respond to my comment. But he took exception, really, to me, what I think he perceived as a kind of criticism of certain channels. But the point I was trying to make is that when you do pursue subscriptions, when you do mark 1,000 subscribers, 2,000 subscribers with giveaways, when you encourage your channel to grow, you have to sort of ask yourself what it is that you want to get out of YouTube. And in the main, it's not putting up videos that are necessarily of interest to people. It becomes more putting up videos that will get clicks and will get views and will get, adverts in them will get seen, and you'll get more money. So you get the most atrocious empty videos going up that people watch, and the actual depth and interest of the video is pretty low, pretty small. At times you'll get people talking about their favourite, breakfast cereal and this kind of thing, and some people took that the wrong way when I said that. If you want to watch videos about breakfast cereals, that's fine, go ahead and do it. But to me, I would much rather that YouTube had videos that I was interested in listening to and watching myself, and and because those people are obeying laws in exactly the same way as grains of sand obey laws in the sand pile, the shape and the look of YouTube is altered, and that's a difficult kind of link to make, connection to make, but you know, I'm convinced that that is the case. So another video that I watched yesterday, and apologies, I've forgotten the channels. Yeah, I can't really find it without pausing the video, so I won't name the video. But it was another response to Gavin, and it was an American. I've subscribed to his channel now. It wasn't a channel I was aware of before I saw his, you know, this post about the Ukraine, and he is a lot more diplomatic in what he says, you know, but he says that he totally sympathised with Gavin and agreed with him, and wanted to express his sympathy for Ukraine in the video, but he totally understood why some people wouldn't, you know, want to come out and say that. And one of the reasons he said, and this sounds unbelievable, but it matches again exactly what I've just tried to explain to you, that he thought that people probably did that, or didn't do videos, because they were worried about losing subscribers and getting, you know, negative comments and so on. And that really, when you think about it, that is an unbelievable thing to say, but I think he is absolutely right, that people aren't prepared to speak out against you know, the barbarities that are going on in the Ukraine, just because they're worried that they might drop a few subscriptions. I mean, isn't that an unbelievable state of affairs that the world has got to? But it's exactly spot on as far as I'm concerned, that you know, people are kind of almost unconsciously looking at their subscription levels, and they're not sort of thinking you know, about what effect that is having on the world in general. You've got to speak up. You have you know, if you remain quiet and just think you can hide your head in the sands, and you know, life is going to go on comfortably for you, then that may well, you know, be the case, because there are very, very many minor changes in the world. But once in a while, that world you live in, just because it has reached this self-organized criticality, as it's known, will produce a massive avalanche and a change in your world that will happen forever. And that has already happened now with the Ukraine. Things are never going to go back to the way they were before. People will obviously hope they will do, but for instance, one of Putin's great strengths, or one of the cards that he can play, is that he doesn't live in a democracy, and he doesn't have to react to voters voting him out of office. In the West, we do, and we live in a democracy, and in a couple of years' time, when the sanctions are still biting on Russia, they're going to be biting on us as well, and our system, our democratic system, is likely to break first, and we're likely to feel the pinch in our pockets and vote governments out who are, you know, prepared to continue with those sanctions. So again, it's a more understandable attitude towards negotiating with Russia than saying that obeying laws about likes and dislikes on YouTube. But there's another law in play there, which is that you feel the economic constraints, and you feel for your family because you're not putting food on the table or something like that. It's quite understandable that you would want to rectify that situation rather than have a more overall view that what you're suffering is nothing like what the people in the Ukraine are suffering, and you want to get back to a more comfortable situation and get on with your own life. It's just not going to happen now. The other far more serious matter is that if you take wars as a whole, and you look at the scale of the wars over a particular period of time, they are going to obey exactly those same mathematical laws. You'll have street fights, almost hundreds and hundreds and millions of them. Tens of thousands of wars between neighbourhoods, and eventually it will go all the way up to, maybe 2 world wars, and then 1 nuclear war. That line is there. There's going to be a direct linearity on that line, and it tells you that a nuclear war is possible. It also tells you it's almost inevitable. There's no getting around that, but you can change the probability of it happening by changing the gradient of that line, and we can all play a kind of small part in that. Now, we are very close, I would say. There's this thing called the doomsday clock, and I've no idea what time it's telling at the moment, but we must be nigh on midnight is about to strike. Putin has already kind of obliquely threatened the use of nuclear weapons. NATO, this is another one of Putin's strengths, is that NATO is a defensive alliance. He is not, they are not going to, no matter how much the Ukraine is pummeled, they are not going to step in with a no-fly zone or anything, because that would then be an aggressive act, and Putin could then use it to wage war on NATO. You have, nuclear arms on both sides, and it could rapidly develop into a nuclear war. Even so, there is still a chance of that happening, because NATO powers are aiding the Ukraine with weaponry, and it is quite possible that that the Russians might try to interdict that supply. That would then also be an attack on a NATO country. So, for instance, yesterday there was an Estonian ship sank in the Black Sea after an explosion as it was approaching Odessa. Estonia is a NATO country. What caused that explosion? If it was, a missile fired by a Russian plane, or a torpedo fired by a Russian submarine, whatever it was, that is an attack on NATO. Turkey are flying in drones. There was a flight yesterday of drones, which have been very effective at damaging the Russian convoys as they come down from the north. Turkey is a NATO country. Russia might well feel justified in shooting down those planes delivering those drones. There's also, I haven't seen it confirmed since, but 4 or 5 days ago I heard that on one BBC report that Ukrainian pilots were travelling to Poland and picking up fighter jets that the EU were supplying them and flying them back to the Ukraine to use. Again, you know, they could be. When would it be legitimate in the Russians' eyes to shoot those down? If they're flying over Poland, is that an attack on Poland? You know, it's just the number of trigger points, and now with you know, the potential damage to nuclear power stations as well, the number of trigger points for Russia feeling that they are at war with NATO, which they would be if they did, you know, attack NATO, feeling that they then have the right to use nuclear weapons. And this is the dilemma we have, that Russia has a lot of different types of nuclear weapons, some of which can be used tactically, so they could even use them inside the Ukraine. Would that trigger a response from NATO? It certainly would if those weapons fell in Poland, and in the UK we don't have a similar weapon that we can use in response. We would have to go straight to Trident, and you know, that's the only nuclear weapons we have. So we would be then bombing Russian cities. We wouldn't be bombing, you know, the battlefield. We would be bombing cities in this link of mutually assured destruction. So, you know, again, democratically, a lot of people certainly wouldn't be happy with that situation, because it would provoke a response from Russia, you know, and bomb our cities. So the whole thing can easily escalate. The system has organised itself to it's self-organising criticality, the sandpile, and it has organised itself to that state where a tiny thing can have a massive effect. A couple of other things about complexity theory that I might as well go into while they're at the back of my mind. And they're about to escape already. Yeah, they've gone. See, this is why it's so difficult to describe, because you have to keep multiple things in your mind and try and tell them one at a time when they all apply. One of the things that I remember, it was that we pride ourselves on our evolution and how we have developed into the sort of supreme creature on the planet and so on. But one of the odd things about that complexity theory shows, and again I won't try and explain it to you, is that you get peaks, what are known as extinction peaks. And extinctions aren't mass deaths. So people think about the extinction of the dinosaurs and a meteor strike, you know, obliterating the whole species of dinosaurs. It doesn't really quite work like that. Although extinctions do mean the dying out of a species, they don't mean mass deaths. What extinction is when a species has evolved to a point where it can't evolve fast enough to deal with changing situations. Extinction is a direct a direct result of evolution. So the big irony is, the more evolved you become, the more likely you are for your species to go extinct. Again, it's a difficult thing to to kind of comprehend, but you can prove it mathematically. So so we are highly developed, evolved species, but we haven't evolved off the planet, and we are never likely to. So whilst you have a very crowded world that is linked so much together. So another this is another thing, that it's the communications, it's the number of links that leads to volatility in the system, and we are just completely intermeshed with everyone, and much of our communication is done at speeds now that artificial intelligence have to deal with. The human mind, regardless of how evolved we are, isn't sophisticated enough to deal with the volume and speed of the communications that happen across the world now. So that adds to the volatility, and it increases the chance of calamity. So if a nuclear war were to happen, it would all be over virtually in a blink of an eye, because one side has to react faster than the other. So there are artificial intelligence rather than human interaction. It's not how fast you are on the nuclear trigger, it's how fast your system is at responding to a perceived threat from the other side that you're relying on artificial intelligence to interpret. I mean, a similar thing kind of happened in 1983, when we were at a very kind of critical state in our relations with the Soviet Union, and there were a number of Russian satellites that picked up, what was it they picked up? They picked up sort of glint, some kind of glint, coming from a nuclear silo in the US. And the artificial intelligence, even in those sort of pre-computer days, responded to it by saying that a nuclear missile had been fired from this silo, and it was only a Russian operative jumping in and overriding the system, and he had to override it 3 times, that prevented the outbreak of a nuclear war. But yeah, I did say earlier about small things leading to catastrophic results, but also trying to manage the system, trying to interact with the system, and create, to operate some kind of control over it, which we're bound to want to do, means that you can get an unexpected result from your action. So this is one of the reasons why I got into complexity theory. First of all, was that I read an article about a waiting list for a dermatology clinic up in Nottingham, and how some mathematicians had studied the waiting list for this clinic and discovered that the changes in the time patients were having to wait to be seen by 4 different dermatologists were fulfilled this kind of mathematical law, of a gradient on a logarithmic scale, that there were very few massive weights but lots of small weights and so on. And the kind of implication was that you know, people, the hospital managers were managing the list in the wrong way. They should have been treating it far more as a mathematical complexity theory problem, rather than thinking, oh, all I need to do is throw money and get, you know, buy another consultant's surgery or whatever. You know, they needed to look at it as though they were dealing with earthquakes or forest fires or something like that, something that people do try and ameliorate and resolve. Another one is avalanches, you know, and ski slopes and so on. People put up barriers at critical places to prevent avalanches, you know, falling into vulnerable spots and so on. And you know, sometimes that intervention doesn't work the way you think it was. So I was, you know, as I say, I was interested in my own sphere and the waiting lists in the hospital where I was working at the time, and found it strange that the more scanners we acquired, the more the waiting times went up. And I was trying to find a way of explaining that to my colleagues and never succeeded. But that was how I got into complexity theory to begin with. But you know, to give you a really extreme, I'm going to make a really extreme statement now that you will probably dismiss, but you know, you can see this. The reason, if you understand complexity theory, why I might say it, is that a YouTube channel decides they are not going to risk losing subscribers, so they don't put up a video on this subject of the Ukraine. So as a result of that, they don't lose subscribers, but they put at risk their family's life, because the situation in the Ukraine has developed now to the point where you know, we are on the verge of a nuclear war. So one kind of tiny little, you know, thought process can contribute to an overall shape, you know, of a system, and then it can go on to have ripples and repercussions that could lead to that extremity of final catastrophe. And yeah, and another thing is, it is interesting with all these political crises and everything that people always use. You'll see people always use metaphors from nature to describe things. So you'll get a tsunami of feeling, of votes. You know, you'll get earthquakes. This is a you know, a political earthquake or whatever. Tidal waves, storms, you know, people always, forest fires, people always talk in terms of you know, nature. And that's one of the reasons I just thought of that, was that our defence minister said yesterday that Russia's actions are going to ripple out for years to come, you know. So he was trying to use nature's metaphors to do, you know, to describe this current crisis. And I'm nearly finished, but before I forget, you know, I wanted to say as well that Russia's great weakness is that, as well as its strength, it is that the majority of people in Russia get their information from TV, state, you know, propaganda, but we all of us now have access to part of the Russian population through the internet, through their smartphones and so on, and that is far harder for Russia for Putin to control, you know, in exactly the same way that he's trying to put up barriers, like people put up barriers against avalanches on the ski slopes, but he can't stop it snowing, further down the slope. So he's acting in a way, in a very old-fashioned way, and hasn't caught up with the modern world. So there is a way for sort of common sense to get through to Russia that way. But equally, the Russian state and the Chinese state are way ahead of the game in terms of recognising the West's own vulnerability in terms of the activity that goes on the internet, and on social media. And I'm not talking here about the sort of electronic warfare and the hacking of websites and so on, and the vulnerability of our internet connections bringing down the web of things and all this kind of thing. What I'm talking about is the actual activity that goes on social media. So they are very good at creating kind of false accounts and so on, and then bringing those kind of those accounts will seem to act in a kind of normal fashion, so that they are not detected by Western intelligence agencies. But at times of crisis, they will kind of kick in and muddy the water. So the classic one, recently was Trump's election in 2016, where they were able to interfere with democracy by just provoking kind of arguments and heating up the conversations on Facebook and so on, and creating a kind of a polarization of society and an entrenchment. So they definitely interfered in the Russian election, but you can feel at times like this there's the potential for them to do it now, and they can also have kind of implanted doubt and uncertainty into people over the course of the years in the background, and I find that in particular was very noticeable with response. I won't say who it was from, but the response to I think it was a response on Grandad's Art Space channel video, and they actually, they were trying to justify Putin's invasion, really, not justify the extremities of it and the barbarity of it, but just trying to say that Putin was really pushed into it and we didn't leave him any alternative. And a lot of that kind of thought can be just picked up, from very kind of gentle nudging, of the sort of social media, just suggesting that the Russians have an argument for owning the Crimea, for instance, and so on, and and suggesting that the Nato is a kind of thrusting, kind of an aggressive expansionist, organisation that's pushing Russia, the old sort of Russian Empire, back, and Putin is bound to feel threatened, so you can get sympathisers and an active Russian kind of pro-Russian activists planting that into people's minds, and then other people kind of passing it on because they think it's a sort of reasonable argument. And that was what I kind of felt this particular commenter was actually doing. So the only way around that is to kind of try and control your own YouTube space, which is what I do, not on this subject, but it's what I do quite regularly now, is I delete comments that I think are suspect in one way or the other, or sometimes even things that are perfectly well argued, but I will delete them because I don't want the argument going on my channel. You know, if they want to make that point, they can put their own video up. They don't have to make the point on my channel, you know, disagreeing with me on something. Even if they, you know, you can quite correctly disagree with anything I say, but don't use my channel to state your disagreement, because you are then propagating things that might be damaging. They might not. Right, so I must have been talking for at least an hour, I reckon, so I'm going to stop at that point, and I hope I haven't depressed you too much. Oh yeah, I didn't show you any of these other books. I got masses of books on complexity theory. This one in particular is actually quite pertinent, because Axelrod was he was part of Reagan's team, I believe, in Iceland. He basically talks about resolving conflicts, not necessarily military conflicts, but conflictions. You know, so on finding standardizations and finding middle ground and so on, and how you go about doing that. And yeah, so that's quite a pertinent one. And this, things like swarm intelligence, is about how things can appear to behave intelligently even when they're not. So ants is the classic one. Slugs in your garden would be another. You know, that a slug wanders around your garden, finds a choice plant to eat, and having eaten it, begins to kind of extrude a chemical in its slime or whatever it's leaving behind it, and the next slug to cross that trail of slime detects that chemical, knows that if it follows the slime it will get to a choice plant, and it will move along that plant. So, you know, if you're a gardener, you'll know that sometimes the slugs and snails in your garden do appear to be acting in a coordinated fashion. They have a swarm intelligence, because they will go for a particular plant, you know, and seem to demolish it systematically, and might even leave untouched an equally delectable and tasty plant next to it, and they appear to be coordinating their activity, the destruction of your garden, and it almost looks like they are doing it intelligently and actively, rather than they're just behaving by these very simple laws. And this one is linked to this book, but that could, you know, it's really a shame that I didn't get that software working, because I could have shown you lots of kind of examples of how, you know, visually how that works. This final one, emergence, is a similar thing. It's about how systems kind of emerge from a kind of background of linked, you know, laws and linked behaviours and so on, and why one thing will develop and not another, and how it's actually slightly random. You know, it's random that humans are the major, you know, the dominant species on Earth and not dolphins. You know, it just happens that way. But when you get to that point, you know, then it becomes impossible for another species to take over until that predominant species has gone extinct. Anyway, I will stop at that point. Difficult to know what to say to end it. Let's hope it's not the last video I ever make, because the world ends tomorrow. And thanks for watching. Bye for now.